for North Korea, right? You can say that the principles of Cold War appropriateness have been well established over the decades of the Cold War. But yeah, that's the difference, I guess. That's why there's talk of escalation, because Russia wants there to be talk of escalation, because talk of escalation benefits Russia, because this is one of their avenues of attack. This is one of their avenues of breaking apart the steadfastness, the resilience, the dedication, the determination in society, in various Western societies. This is something that yesterday we discussed with Lyubov Tsibulka. She's one of the founders of the Ukrainian Strategic Communication Center. She understands all of this exceptionally well. Before that, she worked on things like measuring Russian influence in media in various other countries, or what Russians actually think about other countries that they pretend to be attempting to be on friendly terms with. So she understands this eminently well, Russian information warfare approaches. And it was effectively indicating much the same. Look, Russia is trying to get Western countries to falter. Russia is trying to get countries of the free world to not try as hard as they should. And this is how. This whole talk of escalation is how they're trying to do that. Stephen?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, because it's just, for every war like that I've ever read about, it was, I guess, extremely common for other countries that were interested but not directly fighting to give money, give weapons to either side. It's just part of war, I guess.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly. No, they're duplicitous, projecting, logically inconsistent, opportunistic, genocidal terrorists. Good thing M's not about. He'd call me out for giving appropriate words to what it is. But that's what they are. That's all they're interested in, and they're trying to have an easier time off it.
Okay, and I guess kind of related to why they could be using escalation as an excuse, I guess, does Russia's exporting of natural gas and oil to Europe, is that still a lever some, I guess, European governments are nervous about them pulling, cutting off supplies to Ukraine or Poland, or not selling them any more LNG?
Okay, so Poland. Poland's energy mix is currently about, 0.000% Russian stuff. I don't think Poland does any more imports of Russian energy. I know they don't import any more gas. Crude oil was going through Poland to Eastern Germany still, but I don't think Poland's actually using any of it.
No, but
like,
I was referring to the pipeline going through it, not their use.
I get it, but it's good to go kind of country by country, right? So Poland is insulated from it. France is also insulated from it. Germany isn't completely insulated from it yet, but they're basically working as though they will get zero Russian gas going forward, because that's pretty much true. And there have been serious plans of being able to replace all of the Russian crude oil that Germany was using already in March, May, April, something like that. The economy minister Robert Habeck went and said, no, we have it sorted out. We don't need any more Russian crude oil. We are okay. And then last week we learned, no, they're still using Russian crude oil. But it's easy to diversify away and diversify get oil from elsewhere. The countries in the EU that are still dependent on Russian energy flows are basically Hungary, Slovakia, and Czechia. Those are the genuinely dependent countries on Russian energy flow in the EU. The rest, not really. Yes, they might still be using some, but they're not exactly dependent on it. The reason why those three countries are still dependent on Russian energy flows is because they have not previously invested in appropriate infrastructure to be able to diversify away from it. And there's a lot of gas usage built in, because gas was basically free in the Soviet Union. Why? Because the Soviet Union had one export, and that export was crude oil. And in the crude oil fields of Russia, gas is a byproduct. Natural gas is a byproduct. So it just was there, and Russia kind of gave it to its, colonies and occupied territories elsewhere, be it in the Soviet Union or also in the Warsaw Pact. And some of these countries just haven't diversified away from it. Also, when it comes to crude oil, places like Slovakia simply don't really have the capacity to import it from elsewhere because the infrastructure isn't set up for it. Beyond that, no, there isn't really a fear. The positive thing is, if Russia was to cut off those countries, they will also be cutting off Hungary, and Hungary is actually their friend, so they're probably not gonna. But beyond, three sort of mid to small countries, mid-sized to small countries in Europe, there isn't a real dependency. So, and by next year there will be none left of that anymore. Anyway, it's also good to know. Let's move on. Let's go to Jens. And just to note generally, yeah, absolutely, Russia has been using energy as a weapon. But they jumped at it a little bit too quickly. They thought, this is enough. They're dependent on us enough, but we were not, or they were not, however you want to put it. Jens.
Yeah, good morning. Good, yeah, whatever. Would it be cynical to assume that some of those who are voicing great concerns about escalation are also greatly inconvenienced by the genocide in Ukraine, and therefore could use escalation as an excuse not to actually intervene? Shocking question.
Yeah, they're more likely to use it as an excuse, right? Let's trace the timeline, the progression of this escalation rhetoric. Right? The escalation rhetoric started in Russia. They were talking about, escalation this, escalation that, escalation something else, and then some people picked up on it because it was convenient, and other people picked up on it and disseminated it further because they were under orders to do so, or they were suggested to them to do so. So yeah, it's sometimes when you're doing something you don't really want to do it, and you look for any excuse not to do it. Well, if you were a politician, say someone in Europe who wasn't particularly minded or interested to particularly help Ukraine, you might have said, yeah, it is. Well, what about this, right? This is a good excuse. We can use this excuse. We can use this excuse to do little or nothing. We can use this excuse to do less. Because, what if? What if escalation, right? That's part of it. The other part of it is, it's been 30 odd years since the end of history. It's not something that very many politicians are very well versed in nowadays, because they were too young when the quote-unquote end of history emerged, and they just didn't care about all of these old books and prescriptions and theory that emanated from the Cold War. Right? Now imagine someone was, say, 20 years old in 1990, and they're now 52, right? Like their latter college years, they'd be like, it doesn't really matter. We don't really have to think about this anymore ever again. And say they were a career politician, say that in 1992, 30 years ago, they entered the political party and just started working for the political party. Defense policy was something that was ever less important. Strategic thinking like that was something that was considered to be, wrongly so, ever less important. The Russian threat was laughed away. And then, of course, it's easy to jump at, any excuse that says, "Oh, we don't have to think about this. This is too complicated. This is hard. We don't want to think about it. So let's jump at any excuse that allows us not to think about it." Yes.
This is just hypothetical, right?
Purely hypothetically.
We're not talking about Germany, right? Good. I just wanted to make that clear.
No. Any resemblance is purely accidental.
I'll drop down before I trigger more people.
Thank you, Jens. Lunchtime. Early today.
Hey there. No, I'm just enjoying the discussion, to be honest. I'm just a bit bummed out because I've been awake for several hours and I've just been barraged with hideous things on Twitter, which I suppose I chose to go and see to report it. But God, it's depressing. There's so much of it, so much crap, really. Anyway, there we go. But don't let me bring down your excellent morning mood. I'm being uplifted by it. So there we are. I suppose I'd add one thing, which is, that what you're outlining is absolutely true, Dorman. But there is, I think you're underplaying corruption and the power of money, and perhaps also there was kind of a bad precedent set by a previous US administration in terms of and a British premiership, in terms of the international community and how it is mobilized for war and so on. And I think that precedent, although not by any means entirely to blame, I think that still echoes now in the sort of in the susceptibility of certain, say, what do we call them now? Well, the third world, say, the susceptibility of the third world to propaganda from Russia, because they can use claims of well, as I've had levied today, claims of false equivalency, basically, with current and historical behavior, horrible behavior that Russia continues to do now. Anyway, there we are, a bit rambling, but you know what I'm saying, I'm sure.
No, it's quite all right. Quite all right. I tend to myself follow the principle of Hanlon's razor. I never attribute to malice what can be sufficiently explained by stupidity or ignorance. I like to stick to that. But sure, there certainly were some negative precedents set. There were many negative precedents set. There were many big underpinning assumptions to foreign and defense policy that were set with very broad consensus in various countries over decades. Now, Jens would ask me again, and yes and no is the answer, Jens. Yes and no. Not exclusively, certainly. But also, not ignoring that one factor. Not thinking of energy policy as a part of security policy was absurd. This will, I trust, be written about as a key strategic mistake of post-Cold War Western Europe or something. I'm sure there'll be excellent articles written on it as time goes on.
It's one we continue to make, though, isn't it? I mean, I think, ultimately, I think when I was younger, I was promised an ethical foreign policy, under the Blair government by, who was it? I think it was Robin Cook. And I wasn't really, I was a bit too young to take a serious interest in politics, but I remember thinking, well, that sounds like a good thing to do. But sadly, he died, and any sort of pretensions to, well, I think the concept became sort of warped, and like to this day, we're still dealing with authoritarian sort of regimes, and the old sort of justification for doing that in a modern age is just, it's clearly no longer tenable. So yeah, I mean, we've got the World Cup in Qatar, for example. I mean, that's just, to my eyes, that's just ludicrous that we should do that. We should participate in it.
So that is where the question is, right? What do you do? Because it's a question of timescales. You will do one set of planning for what you have for lunch today. You'll do another set of planning for, improving your diet for next year. See what I mean?
Absolutely.
Right. I hope I didn't lose too many people with that one. But it's a question of timescales. Right now, there is a clear and pressing need for Europe getting energy from wherever it can get it for this winter, next year, the year after. But, and this is what's been missing, and I concur, the clear strategic longer-term rethink of where European energy will be coming from has been missing. That has been thoroughly lacking. Axel, am I being too depressing for early in the morning?
It's my fault, I'm sorry.
I can't tell if Axel's mic is having problems or...
I think that was probably an accident, yeah.
No, it's not an accident. It's a bloody mic. Yeah, I was only supposed to blow the bloody doors off, and then this bloody mic came. No, but seriously, once the mic is working, I probably have to cycle down and back up. But it's very straightforward and simple. If only the enemies of freedom and the enemies of our culture were to have a better insight into our weaknesses, meaning strategic thinking and its communication to the population. This is what is needed if you want that. If you want innovation and further electrification, if you want your freedom, you can't have high energy prices not working. If you fear the future, you can't make proper decisions in the present. If you fear that somebody is going to deny you freedom, then you have to do something about it. They have determined that our strategic calculus in our media society is unfortunately flawed, short-sighted, hardly existent, can be easily modified and lead to the same level of complacency, which then we feed into our education systems, where we don't teach people the results and consequences of the failure to act. This is what it is. They've done it neatly. We have allowed it to occur because we thought it's nice and we can be friendly and all that bullshit. That's crap. We've lost the spirit of deterrence because we simply thought, we can have our little peace dividend. There's no such thing as peace without deterrence.
I agree with you, but I would say the problem is that the sort of the quite noble idea that a rising tide raises all ships, economically speaking, right?
That's generally fine. That's an economic idea. I don't dispute that. That's generally
absolutely fine. No, I quite agree. But what we didn't take into account, I think, is that some of the ships that rose up were kind of shitty ships and didn't should really have been sunk.
Oh well,
And so,
you're taking a microeconomic argument for a macro thing. That's my point. See, I think the rising tide helps by means of spreading within your, say, take a non-insulated economy, from a macroeconomic perspective. If everybody makes some money, if there's competition, there's a high likelihood that more people will have wealth created than the other way around. If you do this macroeconomically with international trade as a function, then you will have competition between the various countries, where essentially the locational, say, factors, the input factors, are, say, for example, asymmetrically allocated. A country without people but a lot of natural resources will obviously have a different tendency than a country with a lot of people, good agriculture, but say fewer other natural resources which it has to import, and well, immediately back to foreign trade. And there, obviously, information asymmetry and allocation of resource asymmetry leads to different outcomes as to how cultures develop. And as a consequence, you have to safeguard against arbitrage, respectively, you have to safeguard against power plays. And therefore, there is no such thing as a rising tide lifts all boats. You actually have to enter, say, game theory and trade. And that there will be trade-offs, and as a consequence, but anyway, this is foreign economic policy. We're not going to go anywhere. So we didn't make mistakes as such for the trade policy, for the game theory. Our mistake was that we didn't live up to our own challenges in microeconomics. We did not teach our children well. When you just said Robin Cook and ethical foreign policy, please read up on Robin Cook and the so-called ethical foreign policy and its mistakes. And then you will find out that maybe, just maybe, the foreign policy of deterrence is a significantly better way than, say, intervention by means of certain projections. But anyway, I digress. I apologize.
You killed Lunchtime's app.
And I killed that. Oh no!
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Okay, I have to I apologize. Please, I will now cycle down, try to fix this damn microphone, and hopefully Lunchtime is back. And please accept my apologies.
Yeah, no, it's. I don't think you actually did
send
it.
Him,
It was accidental.
send him a message, please.
I did.
Okay, thank you.
I did.
I did not mean to interrupt him beyond repair.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't you. It's okay. Yeah, Axel, check the chat as well, please. I think you'll find something interesting in there. Do we have a lunchtime? No, we don't. Okay, Denjan, we'll turn to you in a little bit because I want Axel here for that, but I think you're still listening anyway. So let's go to Troy.
Thank you, Doman. I just wanted to say, in regards to Axel and Lunchtime's little conversation, I should say, I don't know. I think it's safe to say, and maybe a extra easy monetary policy with lots of money flowing out in the ecosystem without a very serious regulatory regime is the problem. Whether or not you believe in one system or another, or one method of doing economics from a policy standpoint. So that's all. And also, it's 1 a.m. So I'm going to turn in. So everyone have a good day, good night, good afternoon, and I'll see you later. Good night.
Good night, Troy.
Oh, it worked. Hey.
Hello.
God. Well, that was a nice little. That was quite funny. Anyway, the app just sort of died on me mid-sentence, so I missed most of what.
No, we all know that Axel killed it.
Yeah, it's
remotely.
It's a conspiracy.
Telekinetically.
It's a conspiracy, Axel. But I missed most of his response. But I think basically what I was saying is, like OPEC sort of fiddling around with oil prices was a thing in the 70s, so it shouldn't come as a surprise that so the Saudis are trying to do it now, and doing it at an inconvenient moment, for example. And guess what? That's a nasty authoritarian regime, and people. I don't know. I think what I'm saying is that the share, like as other countries became more prosperous, I mean, this is based slightly on a thread I read right at the beginning of the war, which talked about the necessity for the US to have something like half of the world's economic activity in order that they may keep some sort of rules-based order. And I don't know what, this is from a former diplomat, a UK diplomat, and it's very broad brush stuff. So I'm not an economist, and usual disclaimers apply. So I don't know how much credence to give that, but in the other stuff that he's written seems quite sound. So there we are. So I took it at face value with the usual amount of salt. But yeah, so if that is the case, and if increasing prosperity for the rest of the world means actually the slice of the pie has gotten proportionally smaller for the US or for Western democracies, those who would have freedom rather than autocracy or authoritarian rule, then perhaps that's the problem. Perhaps that is the problem, and therefore, we should just, I don't know, try and go on that diet that you were talking about, Dorman, which I think hopefully we are, but recent developments like British pilots going to teach the People's Republican Army or whatever they're called how to fly helicopters just makes me feel it sort of qualifies my optimism for the future, put it that way.
Do you know what gives me optimism for the future? Would you like to know?
Of course.
Yesterday, per reporting by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and General Staff, Russia has lost 11 tanks, 14 armored personnel carriers, 16 logistics vehicles, and 23 pieces of tubed and 6 pieces of rocket artillery.
And a plane.
You know what's funny?
Oh.
Ukraine is not claiming that one. It's not listed in their stats. No new aircraft, no new helicopters entered. Therefore, they're not counting the one that killed itself.
Well, it was a bird strike apparently, and we all know.
Yeah, sure it was.
Well, we all know the CIA have been releasing war pigeons from secret biolabs in Ukraine. So.
Yeah, one of us is here. One of them is here all the time. One of them is here. Yeah, one of the war pigeons. Polish one of that. There's a user here who's had those war pigeons.
I know.
I know. I'm explaining for 100 people who might not realize.
Okay. But yeah, and a plane.
And the plane that they haven't
$30 million plane.
That they haven't read. Yeah, that's not even on the list. But apparently, there are allegations that today Ukraine has shot down the plane already this morning. There are allegations by one of our occasional speakers, Jay in Kiev, that it was an Su-22 that Ukraine has shot down. Now, I don't know much about Soviet jets, but an Su-22 is mightily old. Mightily old, like a 60s design. And I don't know, Axel, what can you tell us about an Su-22, and if Russia's really using them, what the hell does that mean?
They are in even worse shape than anybody would have guessed.
I don't know anything about Soviet aircraft. What's an Su-22 from the 60s? You say?
Yeah. I mean, it's old. I can tell you that it's a jet. It is a jet. It is not prop driven. I don't know anything else. I'm here hoping that Axel wants to, talk about Soviet jets, because I don't know anything about it either. And
oh, hang on, I've seen it referred to as a Sukhoi, which I have heard of.
so Sukhoi is the company. So any SU
okay.
something is a Sukhoi.
Okay. Well,
So
yeah.
so you know how when you go on flight radar and you look at civilian aircraft, and there's like A320s and B737s, where an A stands for Airbus and B stands for Boeing, in that order, correctly so. Trying to rile up the remaining Americans. In a similar way, if it's a Sukhoi, it's an SU. If it's a Mikoyan Guroevich, it's a MiG. Right? That's what MiG stands for. So Sukhoi makes lots of different kinds of planes. Su-22 is from the 60s. Su-25, Su-27s are like the 70s, I guess, 70s, maybe 80s. And then like Su-34s are relatively modern. So that's what the SU stands for. But actually, Su-22, what kind of a rust bucket is that? And did you still have to study those when you were in the Air Force?
Yes. Well, they were around at that time. It's a fitter. Wait one. I'm sorry. As you can hear, I'm currently manipulating around here with cars, but it's easy. Depends on really when they built it. I think they were built until 1988 or 89, something. So they were still around at that time. It's called fitter. That's the NATO description. It's
Can I tell you what?
It's a good sign. It's a good sign if they're actually having them on. Let's put it this way.
Ben is listening but can't speak, but I think he summarized it very neatly, saying that Ukraine is defeating two armies: the current Russian army and that of the Soviet Union from the 1966.
Yeah, but it's. I'm sure that if they really had a 22 in service, that is supplemental, and you would use it probably as a fighter bomber. So probably for dumb bombs which they had, most likely for bombing raids, assuming that they could sneak under the radar, and that's pretty much all there is to it. And as I said, they've built them until the late 80s, so it doesn't have to be a 1960s version of is it the 17? I think the 17, yeah. It just shows that they are not employing state-of-the-art, last generation aircraft. They do not have the pilots for it. They don't have the precision-guided ammunitions for it. They don't have enough of the planes, by the way, as well, in terms of functional planes. That's the whole point. Corruption has beset that Air Force.
Can I ask a quick question, actually?
Shoot.
So, like the Russians are sending these conscripts to Ukraine during winter without winter gear or food, for that matter. Do you think they'll be able to survive just on vodka?
For a few days, yeah, sure.
I mean, it's probably going to have a quality of, it'll be like antifreeze, right?
Yeah, if you inject it straight into your veins, yeah, pretty much. That's right. You keep vodka in the freezer, right, and it doesn't freeze because it's sufficient full of alcohol. Easy.
Yeah. Well, thanks.
Yeah. It will be hours before they freeze to death. Hours.
Oh God, it's going to be grim.
Then, John, give us some good news.
Yeah, I don't want to add to the sober discussion around vodka, but I'll take your word for it. Yeah, so actually, some reports from the Northern Front. We just had our new Prime Minister making his inaugural speech in the Parliament, and it looks quite good for Ukraine. I know there's been some doubts, including for myself, about
Archers.
Let me summarize. There were no details mentioned, but basically, he was saying that this new government will strengthen the support for Ukraine, both economic and militarily, and more advanced weaponry will be provided, which I read as must be something like the Archer or something like that. I can't think of anything else unless it's a JAS Gripen, but I doubt. So, but of course, we also have the tracked armored vehicles. But let's see. But I mean,
You have Stridsvagn.
Yeah, exactly. We have the 122, the very famous 122 domen. 122, that's Danish. This is a Swedish.
Yeah, I know, but that makes it more funny.
I know.
Also, no. See, the reason why. Yeah, I have an explanation, then, John. The reason why is because you need the German re-export license, right?
Yeah.
So at least let's put the digits in an order that Germans understand.
Yeah, his speech was quite decisive, to be honest. So let's see what it can bear. And also,
Stridsvagn is defined as Swedish content. Don't forget, it has majority Swedish content. It's an important distinction.
Yeah, I think. I don't know how much of it is produced here, but it sounds like it's quite a lot. Big proportion, but I'm not sure. But anyway, so let's see. I mean, this really bodes well for the future of our support.
CV90s, please. Can we have like 100, please? Sorry.
Yeah.
They have a lot more available. Just imagine if we could get the Stridsvagn into theater in time, and that the Swedes were the ones, as previously neutral, newly minted members of NATO, who were to break the deadlock. I'd be delighted.
Yeah, that would be a good push into the NATO membership. And also, I read a little bit about the Stridsvagn 122 yesterday. I didn't know much about it, more than what's been said here on this forum about the Leopard 2. But apparently, the reason why it's been updated or upgraded is that we always assumed to be in a lower number. I mean, we would have lower number of vehicles compared to any attacker. So it has been rebuilt with much better fire control, which means that you can fire quicker. You can find the targets quicker and fire quicker than the standard Leopard 2. At least that's my understanding.
It's a
It's a very
good piece of kit. Sorry, please. Yes, John, go.
Sorry, can I just quickly say, then, John, how incredibly envious I am that you have a new Prime Minister.
But you do too, don't you?
You have a new Prime Minister. Even for now.
And you have a chance to get a new soon again. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, it's like a revolving door. Brilliant.
You have a new chancellor. Haven't you?
Yeah.
Makes you wonder why you got rid of the old Prime Minister in the first place.
Well, there was this thing, he had some sort of party when he was telling everyone to wear masks and stay indoors, etc., etc.
Yeah, that in terms of world politics, that really matters.
This is the trade-off. This is the trade-off we're eternally faced with, right? Crap for domestic stuff and okay for foreign stuff, or the other way around.
Yeah, but seriously, if you think about it, I mean, everybody knew for his for him to have a slightly more ambiguous relationship with communications.
You mean with the truth?
communicating towards the general public as to actions as opposed to projections.
Parliament.
And so everybody knew about this beforehand. So why are they wondering about it afterwards? Why are they complaining?
So basically, you're saying
on the one hand, they want to have the benefit of someone who is willing to make the stark choices on foreign policy when it matters, which he did, and communicated it properly. On the other hand, when somebody's conducive to allowing Ben Wallace to defend freedom, then they go, "Oh, well, let's moan about it." I mean, please get a grip. Don't change. No, sorry, you changed your prime minister last time around for no fucking reason. After he was a major force in winning the Second World War.
Yeah,
and
but to be fair,
with a complete and utter nutter and tosser. I mean,
to be fair, whoa. To be fair,
Attlee. I'm talking about Attlee. I would never say
I
anything.
know. Of course. But to be fair, no one, like I didn't realize that he would be sound on Russia, given that, you know, he made,
Yeah, but
what's his name?
that's fine. But you decided to get rid of him after he was sound on Russia.
Yeah, I know. I know.
Basically, lunchtime. The argument is everybody always knew he was a liar, so why was everybody surprised when he lied?
Absolutely, I quite agree. But there's a protocol to lying, there's an etiquette to lying, and his issue was that he lied in a stupid way about a stupid thing. You see, and that the British public
But
apparently.
everybody knew that he has no etiquette.
But that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. It's about showing. It's about showing the right sort of etiquette at the right time, and then you're allowed to not have etiquette the rest of the time. I think that's how it works.
Yeah, but see,
Anyway.
that's my point. That's my point. Everybody knew that he was shitting on etiquette. Apologies, so excuse my French. From the very get-go. And funny enough, they loved it. They loved the image of the ruffled hair. Because it was different.
We called it.
Yeah, but they liked it better than the previous grey people.
So let's.
Axel missed my joke.
You had one-eyed Scottish pirates. You had wild expansionist leftist with glaring eyes. You had someone like John Major. What did you expect?
But Axel, we didn't like. You have to understand this process was done entirely within the party, so we didn't have a say in it.
I know.
What are you going to do?
Jesus.
Let's leave the island and again I will stress. Let's look optimistically to the future. Who knows?
The island? No, why would you want to leave the island?
Because I want to go to Sweden.
But you need to keep Ben Wallace where he is.
Well, this is what I think. I think there's a good chance that Ben Wallace might be taking over as Prime Minister because he'll be acceptable to everyone.
No, Dom, there's no chance in hell. The Daily Mail and everybody else and the Mirror, all the tabloids will kill him. He will.
Yeah, it's unlikely.
Okay, let's go to Ulf. Let's learn the name of the new Swedish Prime Minister. Then, John, it's Ulf, right? Ulf Kristersson.
Ulf Kristersson, yes. I think that means wolf. So let's see. Yeah, I had actually two more points, which is kind of important. So yeah, short term for Ukraine, the support stands and increases, I think, which is good. And then also for the strategic long term, now they will change the environmental and energy policy from being focused on renewable to fossil free. They will put into law that Vattenfall, who is the national energy giant, will have to start investigating new nuclear reactors. And apparently, previously there was a cap of having maximum 10 reactors running at the same time, basically having 10 reactors in Sweden operational, and that's now gone. So, and I think this is important because we used to be self-sufficient on electricity a couple of years ago with what we had, and now with this new initiative, I think we will be a net exporter, which is good for rest of Europe, I think. Last
Absolutely
point.
vital.
Yeah.
Absolutely vital.
Yeah.
One place where the rivers don't run dry.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, we have all the cables and stuff already there, but of course it will take time to build those reactors. Next one is that you also said that the foreign policy in the foreseeable future will be solely focused on European security, which is obviously obvious. But also in connection to that, Sweden will be the share of EU from 1st of January. So I think this might have some positive effect on that. So yeah, those are the points I took away from the speech.
The Vikings are coming to defend Europe.
I wish I knew some.
Oh no, carry on, John.
Yeah, I said I wish I knew some Viking language to shout out, but I don't. I forgot. We forgot it.
Yeah, the Icelanders are the only ones left, right, and the Faroese. Then, John, who's the new defense minister of Sweden?
Paul something. I don't know who it is, but I will investigate.
Okay, so here another Swede tells me it's a Paul Jonsson. And his Swedish Wikipedia page, because he doesn't have an English one yet, then John, get on that, says that he has a PhD in war and defense studies from King's College London, and that he worked as a researcher at NATO Institute something in Rome, I think.
Technocrat.
Yes, but he was a visiting researcher at the NATO Defense College in Rome. But that makes me think he might know something about defense. He might have some contacts with other people who know about defense and security policy. He might even, Axel, brace yourself. And if you're driving, please stop. Stop by the side of the road. I don't want you to crash. He might know what a tank is.
And Domi, you could actually, in front of all of those, instead of he might, you could have said he might not with the previous one. So yeah, good.
I think this is good. This is this might do well. Might be a good sort of chap to bring Sweden in Swedish defense into NATO. So he was apparently the chairman of the Defense Select Committee. Then, John, could you do me a favor and dig out what his position on joining NATO was over the years? Because I have a hunch that he's been kind of arguing for this for a while, hasn't he?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Did you say which party it was from?
Moderaterna.
Yeah, then 100% for 100%, 110.
But like not just this year, but for like years before that.
Yeah, no, but they have been they have wanted not to membership for decades. So I'm pretty sure he's following. I mean, yeah, but I will check it. But I need to drop off. I have a conference call, another one, which I get paid for. So I need to drop into that.
Well, you know.
I'll come back. Thanks.
Thank you, then, John. Good news from Sweden. I think this will do well. This will do Europe well, as long as they can not have a scandal within 2 hours of getting the damn government voted in. Like, come on. So lunchtime, you are missing out. You are missing out on not following Swedish politics. You should start doing that immediately. So the government got voted in at a razor-thin margin, 176 to 173. It's a minority government with confidence and supply from a party that several of the members of the government don't like in the slightest. And then within 2 hours, one of the parties that's in government already had a scandal for the head of the party not apparently accurately reporting on the coalition talks to the rest of the party. So, as I say, you're missing out. and you might be looking with rose-colored glasses at the mess that everybody else is in as well. But this will do, as far as Europe is concerned, as far as European collective energy policy is concerned, as far as European security is concerned, as far as Sweden, which will become honestly a major NATO nation from the get-go, right? It only has about 10 million people, but it has a vibrant defense industry and high-quality defense industry. A fairly good military, and one with potential to be excellent very quickly indeed. Even relative speaking within NATO. I think it will be very good, and hopefully. I wish them all the best, and for these fairly sensible people. My prescription for Sweden is a grand coalition anyway, but they just don't know it yet, and their political culture doesn't allow for it. But hey, no, that's besides the point. But I think the new guy in charge of defense will be quite a reasonable chap, which is good. Understand?
It sounds terribly exciting, I have to say. Gosh, but like not so long ago, like when that happened, I'm pretty sure there were certain. I didn't follow, sadly, because it sounds terribly exciting. But there was some sort of article or other that was sort of basically bemoaning the end of Scandi utopia in Sweden. Because it's supposed to be quite a right-wing party that's come in. But I really don't know the details. But from what you're saying, it sounds like a really good thing.
Okay, so the parties that are in government, it's a coalition government of 3 parties. This is great because now there's at least like 10 Swedes listening, and I'll have to figure out how to say this without causing trouble with anyone. But basically, there's 3 parties in government. It's a coalition government between the moderates, the liberals, and the Christian Democrats. Moderates are by far the largest of these parties, but it's a minority government. All of them together do not have a majority in parliament. These 3 parties are, sensible. They're full of generally very normal people, and I mean normal in a psychological sense. The confidence and supply agreement is with the party that others have problems with, including at least the liberals and a good chunk of the moderates and some of the Christian Democrats. They're called the Sweden Democrats, and they have some iffy positions. And it was very difficult for the liberals to agree within the party to even be in a government where they're relying on the Sweden Democrats for confidence and supply. So basically votes in parliament. So it's not that the people that some people have a problem with are in government, they're the confidence and supply partner. But for that, they get a bunch of, decisions and policies, even though they don't get any ministers.
Okay, so it's not quite the sort of the right-wing cataclysm that it's been played up as.
Certainly.
So yeah.
Certainly
brilliant.
Not.
Okay.
No. That's exaggeration. That's for sure exaggeration.
Do they have proportional representation, or is it some other system?
Yeah, it's broadly speaking a proportional representation system. That's where you usually get
This
complicated coalitions. I mean, yes and no. You don't know what the unintended side effects this would have had. Suddenly, like the Corbyn Galloway people would have like 10% of the parliament.
Oh God.
Yeah, exactly. See, this is what people don't realize. You go into proportional representation, you get 10 to 15% tanky among MPs. That it's not always good. It's not always good.
Well, you always, the grass is always greener, I suppose, because.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. That is exactly what it is. Yeah. Okay, so there's an article from Paul Jonsson, the new Swedish defense minister, that a friendly Finn, friendly Swede, either way, I'm not even sure, has dug out for me, that saying in 2020, The Russian attacks against its neighboring countries of Georgia in 2008 and Ukraine in 2014 have made clear the risks, which are also characterized by hybrid warfare against the democracies of the Western world and the demonstrated ability to use chemical warfare agents on European soil. The moderates, that's the political party in Sweden that he's a part of, see a need for Swedish NATO membership and that such a decision should be made in close dialogue and preferably together with Finland. Even now, however, Sweden should include a NATO option to better harmonize our NATO relationship with the Finnish line. That's a machine translation. But yeah, basically he's been saying all the right things years ago already. So I am quite trusting that the Swedish Defense Ministry under his control or under his in his charge will be doing the useful, sensible things in as regards Ukraine and as regards NATO and Russia going forward very much. So I'm heartened by that. Thank you, friendly Swede.
Well, it sounds fantastic, really. You know, if only my poor country could come up with such a wonderful compromise and a way to move forward while not losing sight of NATO and all that entails, you know. But yeah, gosh, it sounds really good. That's a really positive development.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. I'm trying to at the same time read an article in Swedish, and that's going to take a while. But there are news regarding the Nord Stream sabotages. Apparently, the explosion was so strong that 50 meters of the pipeline is missing.
Was it a truck bomb?
Yeah, it was a low Mars.
A low Mars, amazing.
Well,
That's up there with Rabbit Terrine.
Terrine de lapin. En noisette. As I've noted previously, my second favorite French delicacy to enjoy. I was trying to bring Brad up, but he just wouldn't want to come. Oh no, sorry. Apparently, it's a sub-Mars, not the low Mars. Yeah. I can't keep track of all of the
low Mars is more catchy. Come on.
Yeah, it's up to you. You know, they're different versions, right? Depending on which country uses it.
I'll tell you what, that's cheered me up immensely.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad we've managed this. Okay, I am being told that there's no way that Russians were using an Su-22 because Su-22s are export versions of the Su-17 that is the same plane. So it would have been an Su-17, not an Su-22 in the first place. That's all right.
Gosh, even older then.
Well, no, it's the same thing apparently. It's just different designation for the export version versus their own version. And since it's their own, it would have been that. Right. We have a Brad. Brad.
Hey, how you doing?
Swedish government?
What's that?
Swedish government, or do you want to talk about something else?
I had just a few things, just in terms of their contribution to NATO. They don't have a large army, from what I understand, but their air force is significant, and there's a long history of innovation in Swedish aviation. So I'm posting a few. I mentioned you on a few things. There's a paper, just like a quick overview of Swedish aviation history, and then Perun, who many of you know, who has a YouTube channel on mostly defense economics type stuff. He's got an excellent episode from about, I think, 3-4 months ago, where he goes through a lot of this history of Swedish aviation. So I'll be posting both of those to the thread.
Thank you, Brad. Now I'm being told that apparently the operational command south made a typographical error, and they meant to say SU-25 and somebody mistyped it as an SU-22, but they have since fixed it. So, alas, no fitter. Alas, no fitter. Good thing I kept using the word allegedly. I hope that made it better.
Yeah, I mean it's all in the detail, right?
Yeah. So it's all in the detail. All in the detail. We have a Foxtrot with us. I'll turn to you, Foxtrot, momentarily. I just want to note that according to Ukraine, there are a large number, about 20 Iranian quote-unquote instructors who are helping to launch the Shahid 136 loitering munitions from Crimea, and then more still in occupied Kherson region. That Russians are fine with, because that's fine. That's perfectly reasonable. There you go. Let's go. And also the Gepard commandant is highlighting that, yes, of course, the Gepard can shoot down Shahid 136s, because of course it can. How could it not? And that several have been indeed taken down by Gepards. Right. Foxtrot.
Hi, thank you for having me. First of all, I need to tell you it is Shahed, not Shahid. Papa.
Okay, Shahed. Thank you. Go ahead.
Shahed. Yeah, Shahed. Yeah.
Shahed.
Exactly.
Okay,
That is the right pronunciation. And I got a question that what's happening in Kiev last night and today? What is the situation? Damage is too much. How it's gonna affect the war? I don't know. I have no idea. Can you please give me quite a picture what's happening there?
More infrastructure facilities have been hit this morning, specifically electricity supply in Desnyansky, but that's also taken out electricity supply in Troyeshchina. Now, I don't know how well acquainted you are by this point with various city districts of Kiev or various neighborhoods, but that's basically what's going on. Yesterday, there were more of these loitering munition strikes. The vast majority got shot down, of course, of the Shahids, but 4, I believe, were killed, were murdered by the loitering munition strikes in Kiev yesterday. So yeah, that's all I can really tell you.
This electric shortage is gonna bring a big problem. What's the situation?
So this is the thing. The Ukrainian engineers in charge of fixing stuff are very good at fixing stuff pretty quickly. So what happens is Russia strikes one of these substations, and then the engineers go and fix it, and it takes them some hours, sometimes some days, depending on just exactly what was destroyed. The problem is they keep having to fix different bits because Russia keeps hitting different bits of it. So there's constant problems, but it's always new problems. It's not like, Russia destroys one of these things and then for the next 2 months, Ukraine is suffering the effects of that particular strike. Is just that Russia keeps striking at various bits of infrastructure, and Ukraine keeps having to play catch up repairing it, because obviously you can't repair something before it's been destroyed, so to speak. So, is it going to be a problem? Yes, of course. I mean, it's going to be a problem going forward if Russia keeps being able to strike at all of these infrastructure facilities. And as winter approaches, it's going to be, more efficacious. On the other hand, Ukraine is building up air defenses. Ukraine's air defenses are being improved on a week by week basis, and Russia is having ever fewer of these standoff weapons, and that is good. That is helpful and useful. So it's difficult to say what effect this is going to have on the war per se. but it's certainly it's certainly going to have an effect if these strikes can continue to happen.
So much appreciated, and Slava Ukraini.
Hello, Slava. Lunchtime. Shall we talk about Yeisk?
Yeisk.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you're up for it. So
yeah, yes.
You say that they're alleging a bird strike then?
Yeah, it seems like that's the story. That the pilot claims that a bird, at least that's one version of it. I mean, it'll be several versions of nonsense, no doubt, coming out of Russian channels. So that was the last version of the story that I read. I'm currently trying to. Oh God, I just stopped talking to this troll really. Anyway, but yes, that just seemed to be the excuse that was given. I think you were talking about it last night, that they basically pulled the guy out, right? And there was a video of him being asked if he was shot down, and he said no. Yeah, that's about it really. I just think it's it just goes to illustrate what you guys have been saying, which is there is clearly a shortage of trained pilots, and it seems that if nothing else, career advancement opportunities in the Russian Air Force are pretty good, you know.
I mean,
but
yes and no. What are they supposed to be flying?
Well, I actually heard that it was a truck bomb. Lunchtime, can you confirm or?
I mean that is something that I've actually freeze framed the video, and in the left corner, in the very left corner, there is the small outline of what could possibly be a truck. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a there's a truck traveling at Mach 4 and hit the plane. Happens. Nick, go ahead.
Hey, just want to make a quick comment with regards to the unfortunate strikes with the electrical infrastructure. Doman, to kind of respond to your comment, Ukrainian engineers may be good, but the problem is what Russia is hitting, in my opinion, is going to take probably at minimum 3 to 6 months to replace. For the substation transformers, yes, there are spares on site in an individual sub, but if enough are damaged, they're not readily replaceable. They actually have to be manufactured in most cases, or brought from out of country. They weigh tens of tons. They have to be brought either by rail or on heavy lowboy trucks. So yes, the engineers are good at what they do, but replacing the parts, in my opinion, is going to take months. And that's not even touching on the damage to the thermal power plants that have been occurring over the past couple of days, which is more or less basically obliterating the plumbing inside. Of course, you have conduits for electrical, plumbing for steam, plumbing for water, and what have you. So there's some serious damage done here. And tonight was particularly hard, just seeing the, I think 3 power plants actually, or 3 power plants and or substations getting struck in 3 different cities, and those strikes getting through. It makes me wonder, at what point does a NATO country just say to hell with it and, fly their F-15s and to just provide at least some anti-missile support and or anti-drone support? Because at this rate, Ukraine could be in the dark by this late fall and winter. And I'll yield the rest of my time.
No, so Nick, hang about. So, we observe that Ukraine gets, power supply back to places back up within, sometimes hours, sometimes days, right? So is basically what you're saying that at some point the amount of stuff that's damaged will make this reconditioning, reconnection impossible because they'll run out of spares. Is that kind of what you're getting at? Because we see that they get stuff up to. So you're saying that there were tolerances in the system, and
Yeah,
those
absolutely.
tolerances are getting eaten away, and at some point it will fall below 100%, below 90%, and then there will be more long term. At some point, the damage that will be done will no longer be reparable. Until
I think we're
now,
all right. Yeah,
they've been managing to repair stuff bit by bit, but we're slowly getting into the phase where there's too much damage that had been done to the system, be it to too many power plants disconnected, too many substations destroyed and repaired, and then maybe destroyed again, and there was no longer capacity to repair. That there is going to be that's kind of the logic, right?
Yeah, that's my base case. I mean, this is not to go underestimated. A substation transformer going down is a huge deal. Like I said, these things, they weigh tens of tons. I would guess probably in most cases when we're talking about a transformer, stepping down, I don't know, something in the order of like 300 kV to about 110 kV, comparable weight to, a large size main battle tank. It would not surprise me if these things weighed 40 to 60 tons in some cases. And they have to be manufactured. I mean, there's just not widespread spares. They're not pole transformers that are just laying around at a utility company where they can easily be replaced. So it definitely is becoming a war of attrition with Ukraine's electrical infrastructure. And in my opinion now, I don't know if they have enough capacity to basically keep things going without doing rolling blackouts. So it's becoming kind of a critical mass situation, and it's frustrating that if it continues much more, it's not looking good for Ukraine. So something has to be done pretty urgently here.
Okay, so you're saying much more has to be done in the space of anti-drone defense, anti-missile defense to minimize future ability for those strikes. We get that. What can be done on the other side of the equation, the side that helps with fixing, that helps with rebuilding these things? What can be done on that side? And Coquel, I tried to bring you up, but there was an error, so maybe quit your app and come back. Nick?
It's just people and material, I mean, it's going to take a coordinated response. I just saw a tweet not too long ago. I think from that TPXY, I think I'm pronouncing
Trucha, it's called.
Yeah, so they announced that Japan's going to help build the electrical infrastructure, but at the bottom line is it's just going to take an army of persons and material to kind of keep this thing going. Now we're shipping in arms and stuff, and shipping in tanks and other military material. Now it's going to have to be basically power plant plumbing parts and transformers to kind of keep this mess going. In concert with getting some damn air defense in. I'm at the point now where I don't care if Poland has to take F-15s and fly the damn sky and start shooting these damn things down. It's just ridiculous. The damage that's being done it can't be readily repaired. It's just becoming a slow war of attrition on their infrastructure, which makes it hard to watch. So yeah, people and material is pretty much the only thing that could get it fixed. Just manpower and parts. And it's hard too, because if these transformers are made in Germany, well, their power costs are sky high right now, and industry shutting down, for instance. So that's another concern that crossed my mind too. And Russia knows this, they know that these transformers cannot be replaced pretty quickly. And the same thing with the power plant. So yeah, it's something has to be done rapidly with getting drone and missile defense. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Nick. All right, so much more the reason to help Ukraine. Right, so much more. Bionade.
Yeah, we talked about earlier about the anti-drone guns. As far as I understood it, they work also against these Iranian drones.
Which ones?
I think these electronic warfare drones. I've seen these. Oh, just a moment. These. Oh, it's more a question. Are these, I think KVSG6 or something like this from Quertus Technology? These are these JAMA guns. Do they work against these Iranian drones? Do we know anything about this?
I don't. If anybody understands these this anti-drone electronic warfare, please come up and explain it to us. Lunchtime? You had your hand up earlier.
I did. It was just about the electricity infrastructure. I mean, MriyaReport had a guest from the Ukrainian government whose name I can't remember. I think she was an MP, but she was saying that she was approaching European partners basically with this sort of scenario of possibly quite a grim winter coming for Ukraine. For the reason of lack of heating, lack of plumbing, lack of water, and she was being, it was quite a hard moment actually, because she said she was being met with the same sort of complacency that they had encountered at the beginning of the war. So I believe this. I mean, I know everyone piles on Germany, but Germany makes a lot of stuff, So I think this was particularly in reference to her conversations there. I suppose the question would be like, is it possible to get this infrastructure ramped up, or the manufacture of it ramped up elsewhere where there isn't a political blockade? I'm not sure where that would be. And from the sounds of it, these things are too big and unwieldy to really sort of get there quickly. But do you perhaps know? Is there some other place that produces transformers and the like?
Yeah, there's a few places in Europe, mostly in Germany, Japan, US. There are different standards though. So Ukraine's been, my understanding is, using the German stuff, and you don't want to try to work with mixed standards because that's a bad idea. It's by far the best if they just come from where they've been coming currently. Our friend with the space you're referring to is Victoria Wojcicka. She's not currently a member of parliament. She was a member of parliament 2014 to 2019 in Ukraine, in the Verkhovna Rada. And I'm sure there's a chance she might be listening. She's listening quite often. When she has time, she chimes in. But you're right. This is a very important issue. It's not trivial to make these. Of course, these are pieces of relatively technologically advanced pieces of equipment. One thing I don't share Nick's fear about is German industry winding down. Yes, there is less production in German industry. However, the things that got shut off were things that weren't producing nearly as much value added. These are higher end technologies, not nearly as energy consumptive and some other things. So I wouldn't worry about this particular chunk of industry being shut down of production. But you're right, and a lot more needs to be done, clearly. And yeah. John, morning.
Good morning, mate. Now, obviously, Ukraine has a policy of strictly only targeting sites with a specific military value, airfields, logistics centers, etc. But the Russians are clearly escalating this now into a war on infrastructure in order to try and make life as difficult as possible for the Ukrainian population over the winter. And I don't think anybody could object at this point if Ukraine said, okay, these are the munitions that we need. And they basically aim to switch off the power in every Russian city within 150 miles of the Ukrainian border, and actually give the Russians something else to think about and something to focus on over the winter. Because the Ukrainians will be suffering, undoubtedly, and there's nothing we can do about that in the short term. But they are motivated by the desire to be free. And I'm not suggesting that's going to keep them warm, but it's something to hold on to. The Russian civil population on the other side of the border has absolutely nothing to hold on to whatsoever. And if you can start knocking the power out in Kursk or Rostov-on-Don, some of these big cities. I just think that would give Russia a lot to think on. And then, people might say, well, what if Russia escalates? And I would just say, well, how? What can they do aside from the one obvious thing? What can they do that they're not doing already? Because they're going all out to try and wreck Ukraine. So I think it's probably time, winter coming up, to give them a little bit of a taste of their own medicine.
John, what would an appropriate weapons delivery package be? What would you prescribe, knowing broadly what's generally in Western stocks?
Well, I don't know how many of those cities could be reached by extended range GIMLRs, but those that couldn't can obviously be reached with the magic missile, which has not been confirmed or denied whether Ukraine actually has it or not. But if they had a large stockpile of them, and they directed those at power stations, electrical substations, etc., key points in the electrical grid. I'm not an engineer, so I can't sort of reel off the list of appropriate targets. But yeah, a couple of score of ATACMS whizzing into critical infrastructure, I'm sure would give them a very bad day, and a lot to think about over the winter, and possibly a lot to think about in terms of whether they want to continue what they're doing to Ukraine, because what they're doing at the moment is happening without consequence. There is nothing that happens to them as a result of doing this. If the Ukrainians can turn around and say, okay, if that's the game we're playing, fine. We're not going to shoot at apartment buildings. We're not going to shoot at kindergartens. We're not going to try and kill civilians as our objective, which is what Russia does. But if a few civilians die in the targeting of your critical national infrastructure, well, tough shit. Big boys games, big boys rules. And Russia is playing this game, but at the moment nobody's returning their serve, and I think that's what needs to happen now.
John,
Lunchtime,
go ahead. Then I have a question for John. Go ahead.
I also have one. John, do you think it's realistic that that a decision could be taken? Oh, sorry. That's an alarm. Apologies. That a decision could be taken to strike into Russia, because thus far there seems to be no possibility of that. Even though I have to say, Belgorod's obviously been hit, but further into Russia, would that be a possibility, politically speaking?
Well, I mean, that's up to the Ukrainian government and their sponsors. I don't see an issue with it personally, for the reasons I've just given.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. It's just I just wonder if because even now we're hearing all these sort of let's make a deal, peace is amazing, war is bad, whatever, mutterings coming from various sources. So I just wonder if that sort of action would be feasible. I'm not sure it would be, but Domin probably has something interesting to say about that.
Well, hang on, just 1 second this time. I mean, the people who are saying that are essentially saying the same people who are saying Ukraine should surrender its territory, Ukraine should surrender its population, Ukraine should sit there and be pummeled with high explosives and do absolutely nothing in return because escalation. Well, good one.
Absolutely. I mean, I completely agree. It's ludicrous, but these are voices, unfortunately, that people that don't follow the war closely or whatever will perhaps, I don't know. I can't even justify that line of thinking, even hypothetically, because it is so clear to me that this is really, this is just a really black and white case morally of just helping Ukraine. So I can't even argue the other side for it in any convincing way. But yeah, I think I was just pointing out that we've heard all these mutterings, and they would likely get louder And it's not that I agree with their point of view at all. Don't get me wrong.
Thank you. John.
Can't hear you, Domin, by the way.
You can hear me now, right? Okay. So, John, I have a question from a friend of the space, regular speaker. This is from a few days ago already, but I haven't had time to raise it. So he's asking, is it the reason, could it be the reason why Ukraine doesn't have lots of ATACMS that it's launching at Russia? Because there's a fear that there will be an overly excited, missile department artillerist who'll be like, incoming, must be nuclear. And then, response.
I don't think so, because everybody in the world knows that Ukraine doesn't have nuclear weapons. I mean, the US, the UK, and Russia actually signed off on the treaty in 1994 to denuclearize Ukraine. So the idea that Russia would think, oh no, there's a missile coming from Ukraine, this must be nuclear, I don't buy for a second, to be honest, because they have no reason to think that. They know that Ukraine doesn't have those weapons.
Thank you. See, this is what I thought as well, but I thought it was good to come from somebody else's mouth. There are no reasons to fear any escalation, basically, right? That's really the point. Escalation is a Russian narrative in this sense, unless there would actually be, very many more far more decisive steps taken, an order of magnitude beyond delivering, mid-range missiles to Ukraine in substantial number. There is no real logic to it, is there, John?
To my mind, the only thing the West could do that could be objectively viewed as an escalation at this point isn't about the supply of equipment. It's about the direct participation of Western forces, be that in Ukraine firing surface-to-air missile systems, be that flying aircraft over Ukraine and engaging Russian platforms on the ground or in the air. That is an escalation. That is the West going to war with Russia. And everybody needs to be clear about that. When there was some talk yesterday about, oh well, why can't Western troops, just go in and it doesn't matter if they shoot down Russian aircraft? That's not really an escalation. I mean, it is. It's the scenario that every strategist and politician in the West has spent the last 80 years trying to avoid. To try and avoid that, and for all kinds of proxy conflicts and what that is coming from a position of bad faith, personally.
So would you consider any conventional weapon in Western arsenals to be anything to fear in that regard? Any conventional weapon at all?
No, and I've said this from the beginning. I think the West is entirely justified in giving Ukraine anything and everything bar a nuclear weapon, because it is facing a genocidal assault. And everybody knows that. A lot of people don't want to say the words, which is put politically, which is fine. But also everybody who's paying attention knows what's going on. And if a nation of 40 million people is under attack by a genocidal horde trying to end that state and all of its population who identify as Ukrainian, it is immoral not to give them absolutely everything they need.
Thank you, John. We need to clip that and send it off somewhere, right? And just to clarify for anyone listening, right? You're coming from a position of someone who has military experience, who knows how it's being when you're being shot at, but also someone who's read and studied very extensively for professional reasons all of those books and doctrines and strategies and concerns and considerations, right, John?
Well, I've tried to, certainly.
Yeah, okay, that's because you're British and understatement is in your blood. But yes, so you're saying this coming from a perspective of someone who's read and studied this very extensively as a part of your studies. So this is what I want to stress. This isn't a flippant comment. This isn't an uninformed comment, as we're sometimes accused of. Just giving takes as opposed to having people with expertise explain positions. John's position is thoroughly informed in this regard. Thank you, John. Brad, I trust you might have a question.
Well, just a thought, actually. The idea of hitting Russian civilian infrastructure, even that infrastructure which may have a dual purpose, with the exception of maybe rail lines, but infrastructure such as power grids, etc. That idea, to assess that, I think we need to look at our military history, in particular, the words of Admiral Gayal Akbar. It's a trap, okay? I don't believe that would be, while it would be justified, it would be a really, really bad decision strategically, and here's why. President Zelensky has proven himself to be one of the most talented leaders that we have ever seen in terms of his ability to wield social capital. And what I mean by social capital, it is the influence that he has brought to bear in the international community on behalf of the nation of Ukraine that has essentially provided the support that Ukraine has needed to wage this war. And anything, Vladimir Putin is going to lay all kinds of traps and temptations. He's going to want Ukraine to sink to his level in order for him to take that weapon, that social capital weapon, away from Ukraine. So I think going after civilian infrastructure would be just simply falling into a trap. That said, the idea of striking within Russian territory, I think, is completely justified. And one thing that I did want to ask a question about is once Ukraine does have integrated air defense systems, meaning integrated with Western, data and intelligence, et cetera, integrated with those systems, to what extent could the Ukrainians, let's say, several drones are launched, all these drones that are hitting Kiev and everywhere else right now, would the Ukrainians be able to see exactly where they are being launched from? And if they had the appropriate ranged missile system, would they be able to hit those targets as a direct response and arguably not only a justified, but a justified response, but a military target that is an immediate retribution to an attack? Is that something that would be possible, and what type of weapon would they need to be able to do that?
Ukraine knows where these are being shot from. Hell, OCT knows where these are being shot from. There's one place in Belarus. There's another place in Crimea, close to Jankoy. I think there's one in Kherson Oblast that was already hit by Ukraine before. Ukraine knows exactly where they're coming from. Your question, can they track where they're coming from? I don't know, but they already know where they're being launched from. So it's not really an issue in that respect. I'm guessing you were referencing, can they tell by radar, the whole path, right? The whole flight path. That's really what your question was.
Yeah, it's the idea of the minute you launch. Let's say you're one of the operators that's literally launching one of these.
You're saying
drones.
counter battery. Is there a counter battery capability at the moment of the
Yes,
launch?
exactly. Such that the minute you let that thing go within, and the next question is, what's the kill chain? Like how fast can you get ordnance back in there, such that if you let that drone go, you know that within 15 minutes you better be, on the other side of town getting a burger or something.
I think they're relatively static on sites. I mean, they're movable, of course, but they keep using the same one. So I don't know. I think that I don't know if they can track them. Gunny can tell us this because Gunny used radars. Gunny, can they track these things on radars from far out without airborne radar? I don't think so, right?
No, probably not. You're talking about relatively small UAVs, which have a much reduced radar cross section and are therefore going to be much harder to detect. Brad, can I just ask, have you been in the military? Have you been on operations at all? I have not, sir. Okay, so if I said to you that one of the reasons casualties are have been suffered over the past 30, 40 years by coalition forces, US, UK, French, German, etc., is the attempted enforcement on civilian workplace ethics into an environment where the aim is the complete destruction, dismembering, burning, destroying, wrecking of the enemy, using whatever tactics are applicable to that arm, with the final goal of forcing the enemy to surrender or come to terms. Would you agree with that? I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time? Okay, so my point is, what you're trying to do, and I think it's subconsciously, is something that's been a continuous problem for many decades. Workplace ethics, civilian workplace ethics, playing the fair game, right from wrong, morality principles have impinged on operations to the extent where your ideas of traps and psychological and the PR war and not prompting or tempting the opposing force to react adversely are actually degrading warfighting. The purpose of warfighting for a military is to win. Operating within the bounds of agreements like the Geneva Convention. When you hamstring a military, you impose restrictions on them from doing things that still fall easily within the Geneva Convention, but you fear may prompt a response. You are damaging that military's efforts to win. So, for instance, Germany bombing British cities in 1940, starting the Blitz campaign. Well, we shouldn't retaliate because it might be a trap, and Hitler might do something else, which will really impact on our country. So therefore, we'll hold off. That's not what fighting a war is. For anyone who's not been in the military, the purpose of it is to win. Yes, we put restrictions in because there are certain moralities, principles, ethics that we hold dear. Because at the end of the day, a Western military is made up of human beings, and we know right from wrong. But if you start hamstringing and saying, "Well, we can't hit civilian structures, civilian infrastructure in Russia," when Russia is absolutely pummeling Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, then you are hamstringing the Ukrainians' ability to fight and to win. You can't let the enemy do something continuously to you and not respond to it or be purely defensive, purely because you think, oh, well, one, we've got to maintain a moral high ground, and two, they may have an end sort of goal in this. They're poking us and prodding us. They've got some kind of grand plan. Fuck that. Hit them hard. Give the Ukrainians the ability to say, fine, you want to come after our electrical substations? we'll come after yours. You want to do our railway grid system? Every time you hit us, we will hit you back harder. And it comes down to the playground rule, doesn't it, with a bully? He bops you on the nose, you kick him in the bollocks. Chances are he probably won't get up and do that again. Or you may have to do it again, but eventually he'll get the lesson. And it really annoys me that people are saying, well, you know, we cannot escalate it. The leader of the OPFOR has said he wants to steal Stonehenge and detonate a magical nuclear torpedo that will destroy Great Britain. He's kind of bounced over the edge of acceptability, and he has directly threatened my country with nuclear annihilation. Therefore, I think it's pretty fair, having looked half an hour ago at the picture of a 6-month pregnant Ukrainian woman lying on the sidewalk, that we say, do you know what? Bollocks. Give the Ukrainians the ability to strike back hard. This war isn't going to be won by you know, prancing around the edges and continuously being scared of any repercussions. The Ukrainians know what morality principles in war are. They're deliberately not being provoked into committing mass war crimes. So God knows the amount of self-control displayed from platoon commanders upwards in the Ukrainian military is frankly astounding. As I said before, if I'd walked through Bucha and I'd come across 20 POWs, having seen what went on in there, I tell you what, I wouldn't want to be a fucking POW at the end of my bayonet, I tell you. And I used to teach the Geneva Convention. So let's just trust the Ukrainians. Let's give them the weapons. They'll find the targets and let them start hitting back hard, because that's the only way this bald little pedophile in the Kremlin will learn his lesson.
If I might respond real quick. So I totally understand what you're saying. I'm actually quite hawkish, and I do think that the Ukrainians could be far more aggressive than they've been. But bear in mind, a war is not waged in one dimension, right? I'm sure you're familiar with the acronym MIDFIELD, describing the dimensions upon which a war is waged: military, informational, diplomatic, financial, intelligence, economic, law, and development. There are political components to a war, and when you say give Ukraine the weapons they need to defeat the enemy, well, of course you have to have nations that are willing to give those weapons. And if you proceed to attack a civilian population in a way that provides a propaganda weapon directly, and just lays it up into the hands of the enemy, an enemy who is quite good at using that type of a weapon, that would be a pretty silly strategy. But hitting targets that are very, very obviously defensible, which is the direction that I was going. It's like, hey, you launched a drone, an autonomous drone that hit our city from this location, and then we hit this location. Everybody can see why. It's not a civilian target. Whereas if you were to hit an electrical grid in Russia, you're just handing, just like the Russians are handing tanks to the Ukrainians, you would be handing an information weapon to the Russians, which then, as I said before, it makes it harder on the economic side in that dimension to wage war by engaging all of Ukraine's Western allies. You're making Zelensky's job of providing the fuel that Ukraine needs for the war in that economic dimension harder. So for me, it's not a question of if you hit Russia directly in their territory, it's about target selection.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think, look, I'm not being horrible, mate, but I think this is the difference between theoretical strategy and tactics, and actually being on operations. Fight this and yourself by thinking too deeply about the possible results of your actions. You are in deep, deep trouble. You really are. War isn't like that. You can chuck philosophers' names and ancient generals and academics with you know, endless stories of why campaigns didn't go right and what we should have done. The bottom line is, when you're on operations, you fight to win. The Ukrainians are in this fighting to win. If their electrical grid is being smashed up and we're about to go into winter, you return the favor. What are the Russians going to do? Are they going to say, well, that's a war crime? Well, what was Bucha? What was Izium? What could they possibly do short of dropping 25 tactical nuclear weapons now that would in any way be an excessive retaliatory measure? Are they going to start bombing civilian cities? I don't know. Well, they're doing that already. Are they going to say, well, okay, well, we'll start torturing and raping you women? We're already over that line, aren't we? So on the one side, you've got a army which effectively runs undisciplined and carries out the sort of war crimes. We are way past Srebrenica. We are back down to 1942, 43, 44, 45 there. And then you've got the Ukrainian military that uses massive degrees of common sense and values and standards, we used to call it, in target selection, and who have not been provoked, despite the most appalling crimes, have not been provoked into doing anything outside of the bounds of the Geneva Convention. But we're still here having this conversation saying, well, you know, they need to be a bit careful. I tell you what, mate, if you were sat in your apartment now and you were disappearing off to the air raid shelter every single night, and you're walking out to go to the grocers and the building opposite had been smashed up, and you were reading about Pittsburgh, US troops liberated Pittsburgh and found a mass grave of 400 people, you probably have a different opinion. So this is purely about now a war of survival. We need to trust the Ukrainians to do what's right. I've no doubt that they will, but more importantly, we need to give them the equipment that gives them the capability to strike back hard and bring this to a successful conclusion. That's it. And anything else, anything from anyone who's never been in the military to say, well, you know, we need to be aware of this, that, and the other. No, just give the Ukrainian high command the weapons. They'll sort it out. I trust them implicitly.
Yeah, I don't see what military purpose or what objective hitting a civilian electrical grid in Russia would serve. I don't see how it would actually weaken.
There's two. It's very plainly brand. One, what is Belgorod if not a staging point? Belgorod is a massive logistics center that kind of runs Russian logistics in the area. That's part one. Part two, actually kind of deterrence, right? Russians quit doing this because you definitely can't replace these things. John, is there a third? Damn it. You know, what I would interpret this is John saying, okay, no, he covered it, moving on. But I think it really is that sort of a situation. Those are
you do understand my propaganda point, though, right? And you do understand
I understand your propaganda
and
point,
the social capital nature. That, you know,
yes, but you misunderstand the effect of it, and the world. It's not going to work against the world, except for the tankies that are already screaming, "Just give Russia everything they want." Because they have seen first Ukraine being hammered by Russians doing this. And tankies do not matter. John, please.
Sorry, I dropped back down because you hit the point I was going to make. It's deterrence. It is deterrence through, if you like, through compellence. It's demonstrating to Russia that their actions are not cost-free and that there will be an equal and opposite reaction to their actions. So when they decide to target civilian infrastructure, their civilian infrastructure will be targeted in return. That's not to say that civilians should be targeted, as the Russians do, because that is a war crime. And that is something the Ukrainians will not do. Targeting the electrical grid in a major city is not a war crime. So it's a completely different kettle of fish, and it is about establishing deterrence. You do this, we do this in return, and the propaganda piece it's not relevant in this context, to be quite honest, because you're talking about a propaganda piece, really that's Western facing, because the Russians, the Russians aren't the targets of Russian propaganda, aren't Russians, they're Westerners. And if Westerners it is explained to them, look, this is what Russia is doing, this is what Ukraine is doing in response, and that, this is why this is happening. But I just don't see it being an issue at all. The same people who will cry about it in the West are the same people who are crying now that Ukrainians, are rude enough to shoot back, which is effectively what you get out of the mouths of some of the real scummy people currently either from the West or sheltering in the West to push out their vile Russian propaganda. So no, Doman's nailed it. It is about establishing deterrence.
Thank you, John. Hang about, because Daniel has a question for you. Daniel was the one who was previously bringing up the launch attacks at Ukraine. Sorry, at Russia. Could that be a problem? Daniel?
Okay, I'm agreeing with John and Gani, and I will explain why. After weeks of targeting of civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, 2 days ago, Ukrainian attacked a transformer in Belgorod. That was very, very important message, something like, we can do it. Yesterday, after I saw again, they repeat this job with loitering munition and missiles, I just gone online to see what Ukrainian can use. And doesn't mean just GRMS, that's missiles which have only 80 kilometers. So I watched a Tomahawk. And I watched a Tomahawk and I saw they have land-based launchers. And not only naval variant. And I saw the 450 kilogram warhead, the range, and the beginning, they use it like an alternative for nuclear payloads. And I just draw this conclusion. Tomahawk and ATACMS have the same warhead, 450 kilograms. And I imagined until yesterday, probably were some restrictions sent to Ukrainian government. Some restrictions like, hit Crimea, is your territory, is okay. Let's not launch to the north because, the previous discourse of Putin before invasion was something like, oh, we cannot allow Ukraine to enter in NATO because they will have in range with missiles Moscow, something like that. I think that thing is past overdue, and not just because 2 days ago they start this bombing campaign of civilian infrastructure, because civilian infrastructure was hit with missiles launched from bombers around Caspian Sea. But I think the restriction initially was this, maybe some jumpy general from missile defense will see that profile of missile coming, and he can imagine things like, is a Tomahawk, what they have. And maybe that was the determination, Jack Sullivan and Biden administration, to be a bit cautious about ATACMS. Because, of course, they have ATACMS. We know they have ATACMS. Saki and Crimea Bridge yell clear ATACMS. Now, I think the restriction will fall. And I'm totally agree to hit the transformers, the railway infrastructure, and I will explain why. First, a railway doesn't work without electrical grid. railway is anything you can say about civilian, but Russian railway is not civilian. It's very militarized. And destroying transformers, you destroy the railways. If you destroy the railways, you don't have the logistic for the army. And the biggest, and I will very strongly say this, the biggest hub for the railways is Moscow. All the trains from all the Russia go to Moscow, and from Moscow go in other places. And to hit the railways and the transformers in Moscow is necessary. But at this moment, in my opinion, they need to strike Moscow. And I will explain why they yesterday announced Ukrainians, they develop loitering munition with 1,000 kilometer range. That message was Moscow. And I don't think this will be a very Ukrainian weapon, but probably some Gucci stuff. And sorry if they say, wow, your attack civilian infrastructure is void and without any message. How can you say this? Like Gani said, Irpin, Bucha, Izium, Kherson, Mariupol is an entire city. 100,000 people were killed in Mariupol. Are we mad when say, we play restriction? No, hit Belgorod, hit Kursk, hit Moscow, hit Rostov-on-Don and Sevastopol. No restriction apply. Hit with everything and give everything. And sorry, if Ukraine falls, my country is next. I'm not mad. In my opinion, 40 attackers which Romania have must be delivered now. Thank you for your attention.
John?
Yeah, here. No argument at all. The one thing I would say, the Russians wouldn't mistake an incoming Tomahawk for an incoming ATACMS just because they have a completely different flight profile. Tomahawks come in very, very low. ATACMS come in pretty much from inner space vertically. So
I know, John. I imagined why they didn't give Tomahawks to Ukraine. That was my idea in my head, because in my opinion, they need Tomahawks also.
Sure, gotcha. Yeah, I think I think there are probably several stages of increased capability of weaponry that they would that the Americans would go through before they got to the stage of handing over Tomahawks. But like you, no objection to that whatsoever.
Yeah, about giving the Ukrainians Tomahawks. At present, like they don't have a Navy, so Navy launched Tomahawks are out. So it'd have to be ground launched Tomahawks, and that is a very specific bugaboo of the Russians in terms of like they threw a little hissy fit when we built the Aegis Ashore sites in Romania and Poland because it's violating the IRBM treaty, and
who break the treaty? Who break the treaty? Who break the start? Who break the denuclearization of Europe? Russia, not the United States.
I know, but I know y'all are gonna a bit lambaste me for this, but Putin. I mean, everybody in Russia throws up red lines, but one of the like two specific ones that Putin has ever given is the delivery of strategic missile systems to Ukraine, which is what Tomahawk is. Because the ground launch variant has only ever been, I know they're developing a conventional one now, but it was originally a nuclear weapon delivery platform. And that's how Russia is going to react to it. They're not going to use nukes, but they're going to, throw a little hissy fit. And it's just in terms of giving Tomahawk to Ukrainians, if they can develop their own drones to accomplish a similar goal, that's probably better for them.
Okay, let me get a question out of this. I'll ask John first, and anybody else wants to pipe up. What is the utility of there being specifically, at least what's publicly thought of as Ukrainian designed, Ukrainian manufactured weapons, such as these very long range loitering munitions, that as opposed to Ukraine using purely, let's say, imported, donated things for striking well within Russia? What's the logic of that? Because that seems to be quite a lot of the messaging, right? The Saki was a Ukrainian weapon. These loitering munitions now, the 1,000-kilometer range, Ukrainian Ukroboronprom developed. Why? What's the point?
Well, it's so that skittish Western governments can hold their hands up and say, well, it wasn't us. That was Ukrainian kit. We didn't do it. You can't blame us for this. It's all about Western leaders trying to walk the tightrope, as they see it, of supporting Ukraine without supporting Ukraine to a degree that Russia finds so objectionable that it feels it has to do something. Now, where the whole argument falls down is what that do something actually means. Can they attack a NATO country with ground troops? No, because all of those ground troops have been stripped away and sent to Ukraine. Could they try and attack a NATO country with their air force? Well, they could try, but that would go exceptionally badly for them, and they're aware of that. Could they use missile forces to attack a NATO country? Well, yes, they could try. They may even have a small success and hit an airfield or something, but are the Russians going to do that? No. Why wouldn't they do that? Because they would be declaring war on NATO. So it's a straw man, frankly. And this whole idea that we have to sit here and be frightened of what the Russians might do if we supply X or Y weapon system to the Ukrainians is bonkers. It's the failure of strategic assessment to understand the disparity in the balance of forces between what Russia can bring to the table and what the West can bring to the table. The West is not even not straining. It's barely trying in terms of what its capability really is to arm the Ukrainians, and it's brought the Russians pretty much to a halt and is battering them down over the head to their knees in Ukraine, using majority an army that was mobilized 8 months ago and guys who are learning on the job. The disparity in strength between Russia and the West is so vast that once you understand that, the idea of Russia launching any kind of conventional attack against NATO is bonkers. And to then sort of use that as a reason to say, well, we can't escalate because the Russians might do something. Tell me what something is, and we can have a conversation about it. Because until then, you're invoking the bogeyman, the boogeyman, whatever. But there's nothing behind it. There's no substance.
John, let's try this for a thought exercise. Now we got the ends. Could it be that there is an outsized fear of? I really feel bad. Should I say this? Because this is an idea that some tank is now going to hear and then run with it and write articles on. I think. I don't know, John. What do you think? Should we risk it?
Living on the edge, Damon.
No, I'm not. I'm not gonna go with that argument. It's too no, because this is gonna end up in every tanky zine. Let's just go to Jens. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, are we in agreement that when one country sends soldiers into another country, that is war? When one country shoots down airplanes in this conflict, that is also war. It seems to me that the free world, or whatever, if that even means anything, they have designated Ukraine as a buffer country, and they have designated it as the war zone. So Ukraine is restricted to fight the war inside its borders, and the free world has designated Ukraine's cities and people as collateral, in a sense. And they have put restrictions on Ukraine to say, you can only fight the war in your cities and among your civilian populations. And to me, it's offensive. The quickest way to address these terror bombings is to release the air camps. Biden could designate them as anti-air defense systems, and then, or preemptive anti-air defense systems. To me, it's really offensive that for 8 years, Europe has looked at Ukraine, where Russia has taken larger and larger bites, and they have said, we can't offend our business agreements with Moscow. I would like for us to begin to look at this as a war and not as Ukraine's special anti-terror operations, and allow them to fight a war instead of the West are so afraid that Ukraine will win that they have to put restrictions on them, and that is nonsense.
Thank you, Jens. Stephen.
Yeah, I'm not at all afraid that Ukraine is going to win. I just specifically, like, I'm perfectly fine with Ukraine. I'd be completely fine with them being given F-35s and 2,000 kilometer range air launched missiles. But as the concern in terms of Tomahawk is, again, the ground launch variant has only been used as a nuclear weapon delivery platform. And
Stephen, I think you're going into too much granular, maybe. But also,
okay,
note,
yeah,
it's never
okay,
been. The ground launch variant was never used as a nuclear weapons delivery platform.
Okay, well, yes, that is accurate, but only because it didn't need to be. But the only concern in terms of, I know Russia wouldn't really attack.
Okay, your audio's cutting in and out. Now it's muted. Okay, fair enough.
No, I guess no. Sorry. The main concern is them, well, pulling what North Korea is doing, selling nuclear technology to whoever wants to buy it, as well as violating missile control regime and non-proliferation. Nuclear war is not something I see realistic unless there's a physical clash between NATO and Russia, which doesn't seem likely at all. But it's the not fighting options that are the worst thing they can do to others. Well, not worse than what they're doing to Ukraine. But
Steven, your audio is kind of short. It kind of goes very muted and stuff. Also, anyway, let's go on. Let's go to Jens and to Brad and to Daryl. Jens.
In war, there's always collateral damage, right? Even though we curate smart bomb footage for CNN 20 years ago, there's always collateral damage, right? When Ukrainian dolphins blow up the Crimean Bridge, a truck full of watermelons and a ladder or two got blown up also. There's always collateral damage. One side of this conflict or this war is maximizing collateral damage. It's the entire purpose. The other one has time after time showed great judgment and gone after military targets because that's the most effective way to win a war. So I think we should, Ukraine has proven that they know how to fight a just war and an effective war. And I think we should give them the benefit of the doubt and give them the benefit of weapons that can counter the cruelty of the Russians.
Thank you, Jens. Somebody's noting to me that anything that Russia would do because of XYZ, they will either do regardless of they have done already. So it makes very little difference. But excellent. We're gonna get a CJ up. Jens, I'm gonna move you down to listening because I need the slot. CJ. Maybe he can bring us onto the right track. And it's a railway joke. Do you know who's having trouble with railways though? Russia, because they're out of ball bearings. John, do you want to go ahead and maybe let CJ also know what we've been talking about?
Sure. Good morning, CJ. We've been talking about whether it would be justified for Ukraine to respond against elements of Russian civilian infrastructure in cities bordering or close to the border of Ukraine, as effectively to establish deterrence as probably the only means to deter Russia from continuing this campaign against Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, particularly with regards to Russia, particularly in terms of their electrical grid. That then evolved into a conversation about different weapon systems. Tomahawks got brought into it, which is a bit of a red herring away from the actual principle of it. So that was the meat of that conversation. What I just wanted to mention, and perhaps we can come back to after CJ said his piece. There's a piece on Al Arabiya, just I think is quite recent, saying that Russia and Saudi have signed an agreement to develop joint military cooperation, which is pretty interesting. But CJ, please go ahead.
I think the best way to understand this question, and it's an important one, is to ask ourselves, who have, all been on the space for a long, long time and have been, obviously very invested in this, about a week or two after the invasion started, this phase at least, it was quite clear that Kyiv wasn't going to fall in 3 days. But if you had asked any of us here, even let's just say when the Russians were withdrawing from Kyiv or when that was still underway, if it would be possible to have a peace deal that includes Crimea in Ukraine, or at the end of the war, where all the borders are liberated, obviously that would have been the intended goal, but it would have maybe seemed like a reach at the time. Now, not so much, right? Everyone's pretty confident that Ukraine will be militarily successful in this regard. So when it comes to attacking different things in Russia, what I think people have to ask themselves, because this is like the core principle of just military strategy writ large, is does this sort of military attack line up with the political goals and the military goals? And I think to some degree it might. You'd want to be careful, of course, of overextending, not because escalation is at risk or anything like that, but because does it coincide with Ukraine's stated goal, and one goal, which is the liberation of all their territories? And I think there are probably targets in Russia that would fit that goal. Civilian power, I don't know if that would be a better target than, say, military airfields, at deep into Russia, or, factories or things like that. But I would say, that's above my level of qualification. What is a better target than what? But there's definitely a lot of them in Russia. But I would be careful before it turns into something about revenge or justice, because then that will get them away from their stated goal of liberating their own territory, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. And I think the argument on the side who were pro hitting the power grids in, say, Rostov-on-Don and Kursk and a few other places, was actually to establish deterrence. Because at the moment, Ukraine doesn't have the air defense network in place yet to be able to stop this. And there was a chap who came on before this conversation started, which spurred this conversation, who actually said the damage being done to the Ukrainian infrastructure now is unsustainable, i.e. they can't soak this up for much longer. Because the equipment that needs to be replaced has a lead time of months and months. in order to build it and repair it, and that's just the stuff that's already been damaged. So the point was, the root of the conversation was, how can Russia be deterred from continuing this campaign against civilian infrastructure? And the thinking was that a like-for-like response in a localized area around Ukraine, but into Russia, might be something that could actually deter the Russians from doing that any further, because they would recognize that attacks against their own infrastructure would continue, that they would have equal trouble struggling to repair.
And I think my only response to that, because that definitely makes a lot more sense, would be, what is, Ukraine has much fewer missiles and a much smaller air force than Russia, right? What is the best use of their time and resources? And perhaps it's, doing deterrent strikes in Russia, but it also might be better served to simply try and finish out the war, or gain more, of a positional advantage on the ground. Because Ukraine can't take strikes like that forever, then it is imperative that they win maybe quicker. But again, that would be above my pay grade. But I would also consider that as well, right? If Ukraine starts to focus on trying to deter Russia when Russia is still inside their own borders, then they might lose sight of what's going on. And that's why the military aid now is just so critical.
Yeah, 100%, CJ. Agree completely. And again, another part of that wider conversation that was going on before you popped up was that actually the supply and types of ammunition, but missiles primarily, going into Ukraine needs to increase dramatically. And I think that itself came out of a discussion that has apparently been kicked around in Congress with just vast numbers of different weapon systems and speculation around that. So this is all grown out of a sort of a 2-hour conversation, basically, that has just evolved to this point. But I'll leave that there.
Maybe we can add something else to it. The best form of deterrence is a disproportionate response. Has always been, will always be. If you want to exert deterrence, it has to be so harsh, what you do as a strike, that the other side knows that it's not worth having another punch flung at the other side. That means what you do is you take the attackants you have and you hit the jetties, and preferably a proper ordnance depot, exactly where Gunny would say it hurts, in Sevastopol, and you take 2 or 3 Russian airfields. Taganrog is definitely a place which needs leveling, and you take the power station or a substation close to a military airbase close to Kursk, so that military airbase is completely bereft of any capability of utilizing its backup diesel power, because you really hit the power station, and if you want, you can hit the supply side of that airbase. So you show them, A, nothing you do with your fleet will work. We can reach you, we can touch you. You hit the airbase who you hit before, and you hit it hard, and you hit a power station next to an airbase or a missile base, a rocket artillery base of theirs, and that's that. 3 bloody hits right in succession. Thank you very much. This is, by the way, how the United States of America in the past has dealt with rogue nations. Disproportionate, not proportionate. It needs to be harder, it needs to be harsher, and it needs to be something they can't do.
Peter, what is all this talk in the US Senate? I've now forgotten the names of the 2 senators. Imhoff from Oklahoma is one, the other one's from Rhode Island. About tens of thousands of all sorts of missiles, 1,000 M777s, 750,000 artillery shells. Is CJ going to get those?
Man, I'm tracking that as well. That was an eye-opener for me. Sometimes you talk about a wow number. When I saw the appetite for HIMARS, I thought, wow, that is a big number. Right now, if there was ever a time to expand the U.S. defense industrial base, if there was ever a time to make the kind of purchases we need to make, not just for one-off equipment buys, but to build factories, to expand the capacity to produce artillery shells, for example, much more than we have right now. This is that time. So I think Congress is starting to understand that. We continue to see this discussion about widening our defense industrial base. It's interesting, though, because money Congress is spending to support Ukraine is not putting pallets of cash onto planes and flying them into Kyiv. You'd be surprised. There are many American voters who think that's what the policy is. The money that's being spent by Congress is to build up the defense industrial base, to allow our companies that make this equipment to add a second shift, to expand their current factory, to plan larger production runs for the next several years into the future. This is what must be done, not just to help Ukraine, but to prepare the United States to better deter bigger threats like China as well. The Ukraine war showed that in a fight, your militaries fire more ammunition than you ever expected. And if just this fighting in Ukraine has showed us anything, it's that a future fight with China will be far more intensive. Time to build up the industrial base now. I think that's how I interpret these numbers being thrown around in the Senate.
Thank you, Peter. That makes a little bit more sense, especially with the other threatening actor angle. It really ties it all together. CJ, go ahead, and we'll go to Brad after that. CJ.
Yeah, I just wanted to give support to what Peter was saying. Yeah, it's not just it's also helping the U.S. military, right? Because this is the thing people don't understand is not only is it increasing the production, but also it's replacing old systems with newer ones too. With the specific example of when we gave 777s to Ukraine, they were not backfilled with other 777s; they were backfilled with brand new HIMARS. And so the U.S. military has gotten more advanced and better from this war, and much stronger. And also the added benefit of helping Ukraine. You know what I mean? So there's multiple things being achieved simultaneously, with really things that were already going to be bought, but now are just being bought sooner rather than later. So really, just a net positive effect. And I think this kind of boils down to why ATACMS are so controversial, in short, because if Ukraine gets as many ATACMS as they want, then basically, assuming that maybe they've had a few, perhaps, but not as many as they, of course, would need or want. If Ukraine has ATACMS, then Crimea is no longer viable for Russia. And if Crimea is no longer viable for Russia to occupy, then there is no Russian Navy anywhere in the Black Sea. And if there's no Russian Navy in the Black Sea, there's no nuclear triad. And if there's no nuclear triad, then there's no superpower Russia, which, obviously, if you asked anyone, in this space, would you want Russia to be a nuclear superpower or a superpower at large? Everyone would say, of course not. That's a terrible idea. But there's really no historical example or precedent for a country not just losing nuclear weapons. That's happened, a few times, but going from a superpower status to not. So the implications are much, in that situation, different than saying, well, these are just going to be used to attack, or just used to defend Ukraine. Obviously, they would be first and foremost, but you're talking about taking a superpower down just by simply giving a one type of missile, right? So that kind of shows you just how tenuous Russia's superpower status was if it could be outdone by a 30-year-old missile that the U.S. Army's had for quite some time. But that's really what it boils down to, and why it's
you're
so
making the
controversial.
case, CJ. You're just making the case for what I said. A disproportionate response is merited.
I mean, I agree to a large extent. It's just I think people need to sort of frame the understanding in this way. It's not just Ukraine defending itself. It's taking Russia down to a place where they probably should always have been, because who's to say who deserves to be a superpower, but certainly not people with genocidal intentions or actions over the last 20 years, or 300 years, depending how far you want to look back.
100%.
All right, Brad, you had the. Oh, sorry, Peter, go ahead.
I just wanted to follow up. Love Brad's comments. I just wanted to follow up really quickly on this one issue that we're not talking about, and that is Russia's supply chain. Where are they getting these suicide drones from? They're getting them from Iran, by all accounts. Why is the United States not going after Iran's support of Russia's war and invasion in Ukraine? The president has the authority to put secondary sanctions on Iran under CAATSA and the Countering Russian Influence in Europe and Eurasia Act. He has the authority right now to go after the Iranians financially, hammer and tong. Right now, the White House wants a deal with Iran. But if you think about it, the Iranian government right now is on the back foot. If we use this as a prompt to tighten the screws on the Iranian government's economy, that would empower protesters in Iran. I mean, we can start to think a bit more three-dimensionally in how we use the policy tools at our disposal. I think there's a lot of frustration in this space because we're simply not doing that at this point. And I think that is where the focus should be. It is in altering our current policy approach using the statutory and regulatory authority that the White House currently has. We're not doing that, and that's the frustration.
Yeah, it's one of the two things that can literally be implemented overnight, right? Ukraine has all the capacity to move around and launch ATACMS literally overnight. They just need to be shoved over the border. And similarly, this can likewise be implemented by the US executive literally overnight and can take immediate effect.
That is correct. And I'm frustrated that the White House isn't doing that. I understand why. They want to have a deal with the Iranians. And if they add secondary and primary sanctions on the Iranian government at this point for its illegal support of Russia's war, that snarls up their negotiation process, which is, by the way, currently stalled. So, I look at it as, why don't we use this to our advantage? Let's not let this crisis go to waste. This is an opportunity that we should leverage. We're not doing that. And I think that is the source of the frustration that we're hearing people talk about here in this space.
Peter, as an American, how do you like your lead negotiator for your deal in Vienna?
Yeah, good point. I mean, for those in the space to remember, it was the Russians who were the middleman in our negotiations with the Iranians, and this was going on prior to the war, and then shortly after the February 24 happened, it created a very awkward situation where the Russians continued to be our middleman in negotiations with the Iranians. That was bonkers. Again, the Iranian talks have basically stalled at this point, probably for the best. But again, this is the opportunity that you dream of to really use one stroke and hit two geostrategic targets. We're not doing that. It's very frustrating.
Fixed it for you, one strike.
Axel, I think you're right, though, on escalation. I mean, that is proper escalation doctrine there. Sometimes you have to go over the top. The old adage is, many Americans will understand this if you've ever seen the famous movie The Untouchables about Al Capone. Remember Sean Connery's great speech about Chicago rules. If he brings a knife, you bring a gun. If he puts one of your guys in the hospital, you kill one of his. Always be able to go one step above your opponent on the escalatory ladder and maintain that. In the case of economic warfare, one thing we have not done is asserted economic escalation dominance. And that is a gap that must be filled immediately if we are going to constrain and ultimately constrain Russia's ability to sustain its war and ultimately force the Russians to leave Ukraine through economic means, as well as military support for the Ukrainians.
Yep, the center must hold. Hawks United.
I didn't mean to get in Brad's way, by the way, Doman. So I always love when Brad and John contribute, as well as CJ. Hey, CJ. But I didn't want to get in the way. But it was just frustrating to me to hear everyone talk about, should we be attacking this city or should we be targeting these targets in Russia? And my thought is, go after the supply chain. The Iranians are supplying the drones. Go after the source of the drones. That makes sense to me.
I'll just note that Hawks United sounds something like an interdisciplinary Atlanta sports team. Brad.
Yeah, just on the Iranian front, just imagining briefly the idea of a secular government in Iran, it just changes everything, right? So anything we can do to support the Iranian people in that quest, I mean, we should be behind that, with as many barrels as possible. I'm not exactly sure, other than sanctions, what can be done. I was in a space earlier where we were talking about, what is it, a protest or is it a revolution? And the thought that I had was, well, a protest is a unorganized response to an abuse of power, whereas a revolution is an organized response to an abuse of power. And we're starting to see threads of organization in terms of labor strikes and things of that nature. So there's hope for that one. Hopefully it goes better than what we saw back in 2009. On the deterrence front, I'm all for Ukraine getting all the things like right now. So F-16s, ATACMS, integrated air defense, all the things. I think deterrence comes in the form of capabilities and the intelligent use thereof. And so to Peter's point, like go after the supply chain, absolutely hit the targets that make a difference. From the West standpoint, we need to provide them with the capabilities. And personally, I trust the Ukrainians to be judicious and hit the targets that are in their interest to hit. My point earlier was that a lot of the resources they brought to bear have been done because of their relations with the West. And so Ukraine needs to decide which targets will fit within parameters that will still make it possible for them to leverage those relationships. But hitting virtually any target within reason justified? Sure. Is it wise? That's for the Ukrainians to decide.
John.
Thanks. I don't know if we've moved on too far from this now, but just a very quick point about the Russian nuclear triad and the Russian Navy. Actually, losing the Black Sea Fleet in Crimea wouldn't really affect the Russian nuclear triad because their SSBN fleet is primarily based in the north on and around the Kola Peninsula. So in that respect, Finland joining NATO is actually much more catastrophic for the security of Russia's nuclear triad than the loss of the Black Sea potentially would be. Because with Finland in NATO, that puts all of their strategic bomber bases and ports, submarine bases, at risk. They can all be hit within minutes from Finland. So that's really probably one of the biggest shockers to come out of this war in terms of Russia's strategic position. It's Finland joining NATO is absolutely wrecking them. Losing the Black Sea in that respect would be the icing on the cake.
I would just pipe up here and say one thing. When Ukraine kicks Russia out of Ukraine, we will do, or I will do a space if the MriyaReport is no more, but I think it will be. Because I have two people who study Arctic warfare and or have written a book on ballistic missiles in Russia and nuclear stuff to talk about exactly this. Talk about exactly. No. Two former guests in the space.
Well, then you have another one now, Keir Giles.
Excellent.
I'm trying to get him here.
Well, Bilyana, who was with us last week, her previous book was on Russian attitude to missile defense in the context of ICBMs and SSBNs. And Mina Olender primarily studied